Today on Locked On Red Wings, what qualities of a Stanley Cup Finals team does Detroit still need, and what do they maybe already have?
You're Locked On Red Wings, your daily podcast on the Detroit Red Wings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
God, I still can't get over how much more I love the new intro over the old one. Like, the old one was fine, but every time I hit that intro button and it starts playing, I'm like, yeah, I dig it. It gets me in the zone, man. I'm a sucker for like a deep bass line, and that one's got like, right, it just undercuts. It sounds really good. I'm like, all right, now I'm in the zone. Now we're good. Here. Welcome back to the Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are your hosts, Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley. I'm formerly a broadcast producer for 97.1 The Ticket, while Scotty is the host over at Locked On Tigers, as well as a freelance journalist for the Detroit News. And on today's episode, guys, we're going to talk to you about the Stanley Cup Final, right? We're going to preview it. That starts tomorrow by the time you're listening to this, as we are recording on Thursday, but this will be Friday's episode. And we're going to preview that Stanley Cup Final and then talk a little bit about what qualities of those two teams that are meeting in the final that the Red Wings still need to get, and maybe some qualities that they actually already have. There's a couple things that I wrote down that I'm like, actually, they actually may have this. So we'll talk about that. But before we can get to that, I got to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. Also, thanks for making Locked On Red Wings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. So yeah, Scotty, the first thing I simply want to talk about is, before we get into like the Red Wings centric angle between it, this is for the Florida Panthers, it's the second straight year that they've made the Stanley Cup Final. For the Edmonton Oilers, it's the first time in decade. 2005 was the last time they made the Stanley Cup Final, when they upset the Red Wings early on in the playoffs. And there's going to be a slash in here, who do you think is going to win the Stanley Cup Final, / who do you want to win the Stanley Cup Final?
Yeah, this is, first off, I think this is a fantastic cup. I really do. To me, this is very, one of the best rosters, if not the best roster in the NHL, versus the best player of a generation. I think that that's a really cool storyline. It's a really cool matchup. I'm very, very, very excited for this cup. I go back and forth on who I quote unquote want, like, quite a bit, just because I would like to see McDavid win a cup. Like, that would be cool. I'm all for it. It would be cool to witness that. But I also want the Canada streak to keep going. So it's like this weird kind of dilemma in my head where I certainly don't want the cup to go to someone in our division, but I also don't want I want the Canada streak to keep going. I don't want a Canadian team to win it. So I'm kind of between a rock and a hard place with who I want to win. I think, man, if I had to pick who I think is going to win, I think I would have to just default to the Panthers. Again, like, this is a conversation we've been having with opponents of the Oilers for 5 years now, and it's, can McDavid and Draisaitl just like will this team kind of over the hump against whoever they play? And I think the Florida Panthers are an unbelievably deep. We obviously know that very well. We play them a lot every season. Unbelievably deep team. Playoff Bob is a real thing. He's been lights out this postseason, especially in that Rangers series for most of it. He was really solid. I think I'd have to default to the Panthers, but there's also something to be said for
Wanter you think is going to win.
I think. I already told you. I don't know if I can pick Want. Fair. I don't want the cup to go in division, but I also want the Canada streak to keep going, so it's like a weird thing. So I think I'd have to default to Florida for who I think, for sure. But again, there's something to be said for who has the two best players on the ice, right? The Oilers have the two best players in this series. And so there's something to be said for that as well. I think it's honestly very weirdly similar to the NBA finals, not to talk basketball, but the argument that one at least or two of the best players are on one team, and then the other team's just a better team. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, to answer my own question, right, I agree with you. I think the Panthers are going to win the Stanley Cup. I think that they are a deeper team overall. I think and the one area where I think they really excel, where the Edmonton Oilers don't, excuse me. Oh, no, thought I had to sneeze, but it passed. The one area where the Panthers really exceed, where I think the Oilers come up short, is that physicality department, right? Because Edmonton Oilers, they play with so much skill. Not that they don't have grit guys on their roster, but when you think of the Oilers, you think of the just sheer amount of skill players they have, especially high-end skill players. But we saw it. We know it intimately, right? Because we played the Red Wings played the Florida Panthers so much in the regular season, and we saw so many of those games. That team toes the line of physicality and penalty taking constantly. And how many tirades did we go on that they know that the refs are going to call an even game, so they take penalties that are, I guess I should say, they would make plays that would be penalties, but they don't get called because the referees are only going to call so much. And that style lends itself so well in the playoffs. Like, they play playoff caliber hockey. They play playoff style hockey in the regular season. In the playoffs, whistles will oftentimes go away, even more so. So that's going to just further lend to their style, and it really has. I mean, you see it, like, they are a dominant hockey team in the playoffs here, that while they didn't have a single 100-point scorer on their team this year, although they did have a 57-goal scorer in Sam Reinhart, who also had 94 points, so pretty damn close. They're just a deeper team with a high-end goaltender who and a good defense, right? And not to say the Edmonton Oilers don't have any of that either, right? But there's also something to be said about being there before. This is a team that has won a President's Trophy, been bounced, made a decent run, Stanley Cup Final, out of the playoffs, right? Like, out of the playoffs, then Stanley Cup Final. Like, they have the playoff experience under their belt now, where the Oilers, who have made it to the conference finals before, this is their first trip to the Stanley Cup Final. I think the experience is going to lend itself more, but not to undersell, right, what the Edmonton Oilers are either. Like you said, anything can happen when McDavid and Draisaitl are on the ice. They could very easily outskill the physicality of the Florida Panthers. And they have, and this is a deeper Edmonton Oilers team too than we've seen in recent years, right? Like, in the years past, it's been the McDavid and Draisaitl show, and then like Draisaitl will get injured in the playoffs, and so he hasn't been able to play, and then all the production dries up. That hasn't happened this year. But they also got like guys like Evan Bouchard, right? He was a 10th overall pick in 2018, and he's blossomed this season into this fantastic playmaking defenseman. I think he had like 57 assists this season or something insane. Yeah. He had 64 assists this year. He had 82 points. Zach Hyman was not to give Ken Holland too much credit, but that was a great signing by Ken Holland that I'm sure everyone panned when they made that acquisition. He scored 54 goals this year. So, like, this is a team that has the high-end talent, and they're deeper this year than they ever have been before. Their biggest question mark, in my opinion, is still in net. But, right, this is a team that has high-end talent and skilled their way into the finals, whereas the Panthers, who, and not to undercut, I'm not trying to say one's skill, one's grit, right? The Panthers have a ton of talent too. Matthew Tkachuk, Verhaeghe, Reinhart, all those guys. But when I think about a team that's going to win a Stanley Cup, I think the Panthers are the more complete team and the more Stanley Cup Final-esque team to do so. That being said, I would prefer, and I've debated this over a couple days, I would prefer the Oilers to win the Stanley Cup. One, because it's kind of funny, it's kind of cheeky and funny to poke fun at Canada, be like, ha, you guys haven't won a Stanley Cup since the 90s. Well, they also only have 10 NHL teams, and who makes up the bulk majority of every Stanley Cup team anyways? Canadians. So every time a team wins the cup, that cup is going to Canada for like
10
most
NHL
of the summer.
Teams?
Yeah, don't they?
It's like 6.
Yeah, even less. My point's even better.
6 or 7? It's definitely not 10.
And given year basis, the odds of a Canadian team winning the Stanley Cup are a lot fewer than an American team. It doesn't matter.
It's still funny.
Right. The only reason it is still funny, but it's not funny enough for me to care if the Oilers won. Right.
Sure.
The only thing for me is like then the Ken Holland defenders would be like, he did it again. Like he wasn't gifted the 2 best players. Like Evan Bouchard, who blossomed on the scene, wasn't even his draft pick. That was the last draft pick of the GM before him. So like the best thing he's done so far was Zach Hyman.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think I would, I guess I would lean Edmonton. Like I don't want the Cup to go to a division rival. Like I'm good on that. I guess,
especially the Panthers, because I hate them so much.
Right, and I would like to see McDavid get a ring. That's all fine and dandy. There is just a part of me that, like, if the Panthers did win, I'd be like, like Canada.
Right. Also, to note, the Panthers are the favorites to win the Stanley Cup, not minus 130 odds on FanDuel.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Where the Oilers are plus 108. It makes sense to me, too. I mean, the Panthers have home ice advantage as well. And like I said, I just think that they're the deeper team, and it seems that FanDuel agrees with me. But again, I wouldn't be entirely shocked if the Edmonton Oilers won either. Anyways, we'll head to segment 2 here, and when we come back, we'll talk about what makes these teams Stanley Cup Final teams a little bit more in depth, and maybe talk about what they have that the Red Wings don't and what they have that the Red Wings do. So stay tuned for that in segment 2 of Locked On Red Wings. Got to talk to you guys today about Policygenius. A lot of life is unpredictable, but a good life insurance plan gives your family a financial safety net to protect against some of the unknowns. Policygenius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. It makes choosing the right policy for your family easy and quick. With Policygenius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some options are 100% online and let you avoid unnecessary medical exams. They let you customize it as well. Policygenius helps you easily compare your options from America's top insurers in just a few clicks, and their award-winning agents can even walk you through the process step by step. Your work life insurance policy may not offer enough protection for your family needs, or even worse, it may not come with you if you leave your job. So Policygenius has no incentive to recommend one insurer over another, so you can trust their guidance. They have thousands of 5-star reviews on Google and Trustpilot from customers who found the best fit for their needs. Get peace of mind by finding the right life insurance with Policygenius. Head to policygenius.com or click the link in the description to get your life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com. Segment 2, Locked On Red Wings podcast. Now, Scotty, let's pivot to talk about the Red Wings a little bit.
It's 7, by the way. 7.
Okay.
Winnipeg going back was 7.
I said that. I didn't count in my head. I just said a number. So
that's good. That's a good strategy.
I knew it was fewer. It was less than a third. So I said 10. Scotty, anyways, segment 2 here. You know, where do you want to begin with this conversation, localizing it to the Red Wings, right? Because we are Locked On Red Wings. When we're talking about what the quality of these teams that the Red Wings do have and don't have, would you rather start with do or don't?
That's a good question. Let's start with don't. We'll end on a high note.
All right, take us away, buddy.
Well, I mean, I think for starters, the biggest thing, and we talked about this a little bit off air before, one of the really big things that jumps out at me is just, this is going to shock people, but goaltending. It's like when you look at the final 4 teams, so like the 4 teams that were in the conference finals, 3 of them had goalies that are considered like upper echelon, if not S tier, like A or S tier goalies, right? And the only team that didn't has Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl on it. So like that's even like a little bit of a, not a bailout necessarily, but right, like we don't have those, right. We don't have 2 of the 3 to 5 best players in the world on our team. So when looking at, and this is not just a this year thing either, right? Like we talked about this a little bit last year as well. Relatively consistently, the teams that are making it very deep, again, consistently into the postseason, are teams that have really reliable and top-end goaltending. And the Wings have obviously really struggled with that. I mean, I was just going to say over the last few years, but you can date that back to the last, 6 or 7 years if you want to go like upper echelon, like consistent goaltending. So I think that is kind of the first thing that really is very easy to point to and jumps out the page at me is like, like Igor and Bob and like Ottinger, like those guys are not like walking through that door. We're not getting We're not getting an upper echelon goalie this upcoming season or probably next season either. And I think that is something that this team very much, I mean, we talk about a lot, is hoping that either Augustine or Kosa can possibly blossom into at some point.
Well, you kind of have to hope, right? Like, and you talked about the Edmonton Oilers being the exception to this rule. And, you know, in Stuart Skinner's defense, this is a goalie who, if you split his game logs, first 8 games he played, because he's played in 16 games, I believe, in the Stanley Cup playoffs here. The first 8 games he played, he was abysmal, dog water. And that's where Red Wings alumni Calvin Pickard stepped in and actually played a couple really good games in the playoffs. But the last 8 games, so the Vancouver series and the Dallas series that Stuart Skinner played, he got his act together. And if you split those, the first 8 and the second 8, he had an .877 save percentage in the first 8. The second 8 since then, the second half of his playoffs, he's had a .919 save percentage. Yeah. So even he has picked it up, and he's been the ebbs and flows of the season, right? We talk about the Edmonton Oilers, and there's so much going on there because they fired their coach halfway through. They fired Woodcroft, hired Knobloch, and
Knobloch. A terrible start. They were one of the worst. They were worse than the Sharks, like 3 weeks into the season or something.
And like a big part of the reason that turned their season around was like, yes, a new voice in the locker room, but also their goaltending figuring it out. Like Stuart Skinner, who at the beginning, during those struggles with Woodcraft, was very bad, suddenly got a lot better under the new head coach. And a lot of these instances, you're either overpaying for a goalie on the open market or you're developing them. The Rangers developed their own. The Dallas Stars developed their own, right? Ottinger. So then you have the Florida Panthers on the other end. They paid for their goaltender. And we talked about it a couple episodes ago. The first couple years of that contract looked like an albatross because he looked like Alex Lyon had to save the day last year, right? Yeah. Like he did not look like playoff Bob. It wasn't until the playoffs last year where, again, playoff Bob, he got it together. And then this year he was very good and he's still very good. And then Edmonton has been that cycle of really good goalies, or not really good goalies, but goalies in general, they've been cycling through. You know, they had their Jack Campbell for a little bit too, who's in the AHL, I believe, right now. Yeah, with man. A really good goalie is going to carry you a long way. And if you don't have a really good goalie, it's going to hurt you. And the Red Wings right now, they don't have that. So you need your goalie, either one you sign through free agency or one you're developing, to just figure it out and work out. And that's something you can't unfortunately control. A thing I have down here, Scotty, as reasons why they don't. Just good depth in general. I mean, even the Edmonton Oilers, who I said in segment 1 are the less deep team of the two, you know, they have that really high-end talent. And then the guys who are beneath them had decent seasons as well. You know, your Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, who I don't think is ever going to have that 100-point season again, still had 67 points in 80 games. He had 49 assists. Matthias Ekholm had 45 and 79. I think the Red Wings matched a lot of their depth scoring, but they lacked that high-end talent. But then on the other end, the Florida Panthers, it was just 94, 88, 80, 72, 41, 39, 39, 35, 33, 32. It's crazy how deep these teams are, like 4 lines deep with scoring. The Red Wings got a good chunk of that, but the one area of their depth, and this even goes into my second point, that they lack is just defensive depth too. And I mentioned this on yesterday's episode. The Panthers made the Stanley Cup Final, Scotty, without a single defenseman having over 40 points. Without a single defenseman having over 40 points. The Red Wings had at least 2 off the top of my head that I can remember in Moritz Seider and Shane Gostisbehere. Kind of proving that you don't need an offensive defenseman to make the Cup Finals. You just need good defense and good possessions, which is my second point. So the Red Wings, if they want to become a Cup contender team, desperately need to upgrade their D-core as well as upgrade their ability to just possess the puck. But that's a whole team issue that we've talked about, because both of these teams are top 5 in the regular season in Corsi 4. I think expected goals, they were 1 and 2. So, you know, you have these two teams that are just possession dogs and really good in their own end, especially, notably, specifically, the Florida Panthers. For the Edmonton Oilers, it's a little bit more, they're better in their own end because they possess the puck in the other end so much. But, you just need to be able to possess the puck, and the Red Wings didn't.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we've talked about the system, the Lalonde system, you know, till we're blue in the face. That's something that they want to emulate a little bit more, because there's a lot of really good hockey teams that do something similar to that. I do think the blue line is the other, really big I don't know, part of the team, an aspect of the team that you can point to with this conversation. I totally agree with you. And I think that, again, like you have your hopeful, like potential top end defenseman at the very top, right? You have like the high ceiling player in Moritz Seider, but I think, I mean, we had a conversation just yesterday, right? Where we were like, yeah, like on opening night, Ben Sherratt's probably top pair defenseman. Like, it was a much improved pair from last year, but I still think that is a sign that the floor of this blue line can be raised still pretty significantly at that.
Yes, absolutely. We're going to go to segment 3, and when we return, we'll talk about what the Red Wings might actually already have that could make them a cup contender in the future. So stay tuned for that on Locked On Red Wings. Got to talk to you guys today about Game Time. Game Time makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier, with prices on the Game Time app actually going down the closer it gets to tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. Last-minute deals save you up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, comedy, theater, hockey, all those sports. And flash deals save you even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or the event. Zone deals save you even more when you choose a selection and let Game Time choose the seats for you. And that lowest price guarantee will credit you 110% of the difference if you find the same seat somewhere else for less. And that Game Time ticket coverage has you covered with flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets and Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Segment 3, Locked On Red Wings podcast. Scotty, now there are a few things I feel that the Red Wings may already have that does behoove them to being a future Stanley Cup Final team. And I think the very first thing on this list is they have a number 1 D, a true number 1 defenseman, which is one of the hardest things to address when building your team, is getting that true number 1. And Moritz Seider, we've talked about it. Again, we like to use this term ad nauseum, about the usage that he had this season, how it was the toughest in the league by a good 5-10%, and how he got bulk majority defensive zone deployments. And yet, despite that, he was very good this year, had 40 points. Like, yes, his possession numbers look bad, but anyone's numbers would look bad in that instance. It's the fact that he was able to do it, and he led the league in block shots, and he was top 10 in hits or along those lines. So they have that true number 1 D already. So while quality defensive depth they still lack, that's a hell of a lot easier to build out of than it is to just find the number 1 D. Like, if you have good defensive depth but not a number 1 D, then you're in more trouble, in my opinion, than having a true number 1 D and not having defensive depth.
For sure. And yeah, we kind of, I guess I jumped the gun on your point there a little bit at the end of the previous segment.
No,
yes, I completely agree, right? Like, if you are looking for, again, like reasons to compare and contrast that the Wings do have, Moritz Seider is definitely one of the biggest focal points in that conversation, man. And all of these teams have, well, again, the Oilers are kind of weird, but like all of the well-rounded teams that make it far into the postseason almost all have a true top-end, high-end number 1 defenseman.
Yeah, and they also have very good special teams. That was one of the Red Wings' biggest strengths this season. They finished the year with the 9th best power play and the 14th best penalty kill in the league, taking strides forward from the abysmal year that they had prior. So that is something that all teams need in the playoffs to succeed. And we said it with Grand Rapids during the AHL. Their special teams suffered, so they inevitably got eliminated due to that, in my opinion at least. And then you look at who the best teams were at special teams in the Stanley Cup Finals and the Stanley Cup playoffs. The Edmonton Oilers have the best penalty kill in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Second, Florida Panthers. If you look at power play, you have the Edmonton Oilers with the best power play in the Stanley Cup playoffs. So the special teams able to supplement and, not to say paint over, right? Because they have the flaws. We talked about the goaltending and it not being as deep as the Panthers necessarily. But because their special teams are so lethal with guys like McDavid and Draisaitl, it's able to make up for some of their shortcomings. The Panthers right now have the 6th best power play in the Stanley Cup playoffs, and that has been a sore spot for them. Because again, even these teams making the Stanley Cup final, they're not perfect. Nobody's perfect. But these are things that teams that make the playoffs excel at in the regular season, and that this is something that the Red Wings excelled at in the regular seasons. So this is something that they already do and can still improve upon going forward to make them an even bigger playoff threat and inevitably one day a Stanley Cup final threat.
Yeah, and I think you look at some of the personnel on this team and you expect improvement in those areas, right? Like you don't even need to do like the mental gymnastics of, oh, how are we going to acquire so-and-so or pay so-and-so to come in and help the power play? Like if Cat is just closer to what we expected him to be, then you know what I mean? Like you're going to have a much improved power play, even again, as is for a power play that was already pretty good this past season. And I think that kind of piggybacks into one of mine, which is kind of two birds, one stone. I guess it's a little bit of both, a little bit of something that they, I think, have and showed that they have that a lot of the top end teams have, but also something that they're lacking. When you look at how the goal scoring was distributed this season for the Wings, they proved that they had a pretty solid amount of depth scoring, right? Like they got scoring from up and down the lineup. We talked about that a lot. And that's something that, I mean, we talked about it a boatload with the Knights last year, right? Like that is was a team that was just uber deep, and obviously not comparing the Wings to, you know, the Stanley Cup winning Golden Knights, but in terms of just how the goal scoring was distributed, they have their top end talent for sure, but they also have just a really, really deep roster. And I think the Wings, while not like, again, the deepest roster in the NHL or anything, prove that they can get goal scoring from really all 4 lines, certainly their top 3. So I think that that's a good one. But then on the flip side of that, you look at these teams, almost all of them have elite high-end goal scoring from at least one player as well.
Right.
And that might be something that the Wings kind of lack, right? You have Larkin, who you probably can pencil in for 30 going forward every year, assuming he stays healthy. Raymond took a huge step forward. You think he can be around there, but you really are going to need, you know, Cat to hit that 35 to 40 mark that you brought him in to do, or you're going to have to find somebody else that can come in and be another high-end goal scorer for this team, because almost all of the really, really good teams have at least one guy that is truly, you know, an elite caliber goal scorer.
Right. And I guess I should clarify too, right? Because you bring up a solid point there. When I say the Red Wings lack depth compared to guys like, or teams like the Panthers and the Oilers, I mean, I just mean like quality, overall well-roundedness of the player. Because when it comes to scoring depth, the Red Wings had that in spades this year. The Red Wings, for just perspective, the Oilers had 8 players on their team score over 40 points. The Red Wings had 9. But, as you put, the high-end talent that the Oilers have put them over the top. And that's a big part of the reason why that they're in there, right? Because you can afford to have one less 40-point scorer when the guys at the top are 100 and 90 and 85 points, rather than the Red Wings, who's topped out at 72 points with Lucas Raymond. So when I say depth, I mean just players who can play both sides of the ice and be good at it rather than just score goals. Because that was the Red Wings' problem this year. That's why we talk about defense, not just as defensemen, but as a team where they had no problem scoring goals, but man, they could not defend. They were brutal at it. But in terms of one other thing that I have is kind of a question mark, and you mentioned it earlier, high-end talent. We keep talking about that term. And potential dues, what they do have. I have high-end talent question mark, because this really is where we get into speculation. We are in agreement that Dylan Larkin, if he had played a full season, would have hit 40 goals this season. But I think he's still at his peak, a point per game player, maybe in like an up year, 85, 90 points if he plays a full 82, right? I don't see Dylan Larkin ever as a 100-point player, and that's not meant to be a criticism. He's a number 1 seed, he's very good, and he's a captain of this hockey team.
Only a couple of those every year, man. That's not even be a darn good hockey player, not in a Hondo,
But so many people are honed in and locked on 40 goals and 100 points. Like, that's the benchmark for an elite-level player. Can Lucas Raymond be that guy? He hit 72 this year. Can he hit 80, 90? That's why it's a question mark. Moritz Seider, I think, out of anyone on this roster and in this organization, I still firmly believe that Moritz Seider has what it takes to be a superstar two-way defenseman. I'm not talking 80, 90-point defenseman like Cale Makar or, Quinn Hughes or Adam Fox, but just a dominant defenseman in his own end who can give you consistently 45 to 55 points a year. That is an elite level defenseman in my opinion. But it's like after that, how much more high-end talent can they have? Axel Sandin-Pellikka might be a high-end goal-scoring defenseman. Can Sebastian Cossa be a high-end goaltender in the same vein of Jake Ottinger and Igor Shesterkin? I'm not sure. It's to be continued or to be seen yet, to be determined. But so I have that as a question mark because I think the Red Wings have a lot of prospects with high ceilings, but I don't because they never won the lottery, right? And even if they had won the lottery, it wasn't kind of a down year. Anyways, like Lafreniere's finally turning it around. They didn't get the opportunity to draft a McDavid and a Connor Bedard. So while they have guys I think have high-end ceilings, I still think they lack that 100-point cut type guy, but that's just, they got screwed.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And so I think that really is, I mean, that's something that people have honed in on since the start of this rebuild, really. How are the Wings going to acquire that high-end talent type of thing? And, there are models out there. We've seen winners without like a true, upper echelon, top 5, top 10 player in the NHL, but it requires a whole heck of a lot of depth. And that's something that, again, as you mentioned, the Wings need to improve on. They had good goal scoring from their depth, but, we talk about the system and everything, again, at length. That's just kind of retreading conversation. But, I agree with you.
So basically, they have a couple things, but they still need a lot, is the end of the conversation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they missed the playoffs.
All right.
They missed the playoffs in a league where half the league makes the playoffs. So, yes.
They would have played... They would have played, the Rangers in the first round, right? That's who Washington played.
Yeah.
I think that they wouldn't have gotten swept like Washington did, but I think they still would have lost that series. pretty, like 5, maybe 6 games at best. So, all right. Scotty, you have any final thoughts?
I don't think so, man. We ball.
We do ball. We'll be back with a new episode on Monday. So stay tuned for that. But before I let you go, I got to let you know that Locked On has launched its first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's available on Amazon Fire TV. It's in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports series stories of the day with the local experts on Locked On, plus their national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. We'll be back again, like I said, new episode on Monday, same time, same place. It's your team every day.
Every day.